2 men have been taken into custody in connection with the mass shooting on South Street in Philadelphia, including an 18-year-old who prosecutors say fired a homemade ghost gun into a crowd Saturday night and was one of at least 4 gunmen in a melee that left 3 people dead and 11 wounded. Prosecutors say that man, Karan Garner, ran off after being shot by police on South Street on Saturday. He approached other officers a few blocks away, crying out, "They shot my hand off," before being taken to the hospital. He is now expected to face charges of attempted murder, aggravated assault, and related offenses. Law enforcement sources said police Monday night arrested a second man, Rashawn Vereen, who they say took part in a brawl that sparked the entire violent episode. Prosecutors said Vereen, arrested in South Philadelphia, went to the aid of a gunman who was shot to death by another man in an exchange of gunfire Saturday night. They said Vereen had spirited the gun away from his dying companion, and then melted into the South Street throng. He is expected to face similar charges to those Garner faces. The developments came as law enforcement and friends of the victims filled in some of the gaps, but not all, in a narrative of the chaotic incident. The gunfire drew national attention as the country undergoes a wave of mass shootings. And it claimed more victims than any single episode of gun violence in the city in at least 7 years, and kept a spotlight on Philadelphia's unrelenting shootings crisis. District Attorney Larry Krasner called the crime horrific and senseless. Assistant District Attorney Joanne Pescatori, Krasner's homicide chief, said surveillance video appeared to show it began as a spontaneous encounter between 2 groups of men before bullets began flying into bystanders. As the gun violence here and in other cities across the country sparked public outrage, senators in Washington were said to be discussing potential gun legislation for the first time in years. Mayor Jim Kenney, who had been attending a national mayor's conference in Reno, Nevada, returned to the city Monday, though he did not speak publicly about the incident. Meanwhile, relatives of some of the victims were in the early stages of preparing funeral arrangements. Lorraine Quinn, whose 24-year-old daughter, Alexis, a home health aide, was killed by what police believe was a stray bullet, wept when remembering her loving and caring child. Pescatori told reporters at an afternoon news conference that police and prosecutors had reviewed a variety of videos from the scene to try and piece together what happened. The videos appeared to show a confrontation between groups of men on the 200 block of South Street just before 11:30 p.m., she said. One group included Gregory Jackson, 34, a former professional boxer and youth coach, while the other included Micah Towns, 23, whom Pescatori said was also a boxer. Both men were armed and had carry permits for firearms, prosecutors said. It was not clear what their beef was about, Pescatori said, or if any of the men had known each other before their paths crossed that night. But the encounter quickly grew hostile. Jackson and another man walked toward Towns in a threatening manner, Pescatori said, and Jackson appeared to draw a handgun. As Jackson and his friend began beating Towns, pushing him back into a storefront, Jackson fired his gun, striking Towns in the body and leaving him critically wounded. It was not clear what their beef was about, Pescatori said, or if any of the men had known each other before their paths crossed that night. But the encounter quickly grew hostile. Jackson and another man walked toward Towns in a threatening manner, Pescatori said, and Jackson appeared to draw a handgun. As Jackson and his friend began beating Towns, pushing him back into a storefront, Jackson fired his gun, striking Towns in the body and leaving him critically wounded. A wayward shot on the 300 block appears to have killed Quinn, said homicide captain. The surviving victims ranged in age from 17 to 69, according to police, and their conditions ranged from stable to critical.